Thank you for joining us a bit early. We are going to be waiting a little bit longer, but please enjoy our slides as we have them. And you should also see a poll that will be starting shortly. Otherwise, please stay tuned. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining. We are still a little bit early, so if you could just sit tight for a bit. We will have a poll that is open for you to take if you desire. Otherwise, please stay tuned and we will start shortly. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. We will be starting in a few more minutes. We want to give people enough time to wrap up what they are previously doing and then jump on into the call. So if you could please stay tuned. In the meanwhile, we do have a poll that if you are able to take, we would greatly appreciate it. Thank you. All right, everyone, we will get started in just a couple more minutes. Want to give some time for our late joiners, and then we will kick off the webinar. All right, everyone, we are going to get started. So thank you all for coming today. We are thrilled to have you here joining us for this webinar. We know that a bunch of you are interested in preventing work-related MSDs. So to start, I am Emily Prentice. I am a senior research associate here with the Musculoskeletal Solutions Lab at the National Safety Council. A bit about my background. So my master's degree is in public health with an emphasis in environmental and occupational health. And I hold certifications in public health and athletic training. In fact, prior to my current role here, I was a dual state licensed athletic trainer, working with athletes of all ages in all settings with a special interest in contact sports, emergency, and concussion care. And our other presenters will introduce themselves shortly. So to start with, we will be reviewing our agenda. We will start with allowing our other two speakers to introduce themselves and give you guys a brief background, followed by a brief overview of MSDs. Then we'll dive into our research approach for the white paper titled Preventing Work-Related Musculoskeletal Disorders, a systematic review of current interventions and future research directions. Then we will dive into the findings as well as gaps in future directions, and then we'll use our remaining time to answer any questions that you all may have. So now I will hand the mic off to Dr. Paige DeBello to introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today for this webinar. Excited to have you guys all here. Like Emily said, I'm Dr. Paige DeBello. I have a master's and PhD in industrial organizational psychology, where I've focused on studying workplace stressors and work-life balance. And so it's been exciting to kind of apply some of my IO background to musculoskeletal disorder prevention here with the MSD Solutions Lab. And over to you, Sydney.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here today. My name is Sydney Mosser. I have a master's degree in psychological sciences. I joined NSC just after finishing my master's program, so I've only been with NSC for about 9 months, but I'm very excited to be here and working on all of the impactful research coming out of the lab.
Thank you. So before we continue further, so we want to talk about a bit about what our 4 pillars are that are driving the lab. And as we know, the work-related musculoskeletal issue is a massive one. So like all of you, we want to know, okay, how are we going to solve this? And being driven by research and the data, we want to know how are we going to solve this in a systematic way? So that is why we are guided by our 4 pillars, starting with engage, where we are engaging employers, workers, researchers, and innovators through our globally representative advisory council. Through our research, we strive to conduct rigorous, impactful, and practical research to develop insightful outputs through papers, gap identification, and data analysis, such as the recently launched MSD Solutions Index. Through our solve pillar, we identify, pilot, and scale unique solutions, such as our Technology Innovation Challenge, which was actually launched its inaugural year last year at the 2022 NSC Congress and Expo in San Diego. And also through the solve pillar, we will be launching upcoming grant opportunities. So stay tuned for more info on those. Through our amplify pillar, we engage, promote, and inspire action through engaging operations and safety leaders, such as yourselves across industries. And now Sydney will discuss the background of musculoskeletal disorders.
Great, thank you, Emily. As Emily said, I will start off with a bit of background on this topic, including the financial impact that MSDs have, as well as some basic introduction on what MSDs are for anyone who may not be familiar. So to start off, we're going to go over some key terms. Starting with the big one, we've got musculoskeletal disorders, or MSDs, and these are injuries or disorders of the muscles, nerves, tendons, joints, cartilage, or spinal discs. Moving on to work-related MSDs specifically, these are conditions in which the work environment contributes significantly to the condition, or work-related factors make the condition worse or longer persisting. The final term here is ergonomics, which is the science that is concerned with the fit between people and their work. And it puts people first and ensures that the work tasks or environment fit each person's capabilities and limitations. So why is tackling the issue of MSDs important? Well, MSDs are the most common global cause of disability and limitations to gainful employment, and they cause employers to lose time, money, and talent. Most recent data shows that MSD injuries cost billions of dollars a year, with 12.6 billion lost to overexertion, just over 4 billion lost to awkward postures, and 1.5 billion lost to repetitive motions. Additionally, in 2020, private sector workers suffered 247,620 MSD injuries that resulted in days away from work, with the median number of lost workdays per injury being 14 days. So moving into some common MSD injuries, some of these you may have heard of already, and some of these may be new to you, but just showing the breadth of MSD injuries that are out there. Starting with sprains, these are stretching or tearing of the ligaments. Strains is stretching or tearing of muscles or tendons. A muscle rupture is a complete tear of the muscle or tendon. Tendinitis is irritation or inflammation of a tendon. Tennis elbow or golfer's elbow is tendinitis that is specific to the forearm muscles. De Quervain's tenosynovitis is swelling of the tendons at the base of the thumb. Trigger finger is a condition in which the finger gets stuck in a bent position. And rotator cuff strain is injury to the muscles and tendons surrounding the shoulder joint. Few more here. There's nerve entrapment syndrome, which occurs when the nerve becomes compressed or trapped and restricts the surrounding tissue. Carpal tunnel is nerve entrapment of the median nerve as it runs through the wrist. Thoracic outlet syndrome is when blood vessels or nerves between the collarbone and the first rib are compressed. Back pain is a fairly self-explanatory one. It is pain that results from strains or sprains around the spine. A herniated disc is when the disc between the vertebra of your spine begins to break down and squish out, which presses against surrounding nerves. Hand-arm vibration syndrome impacts circulation and limits blood flow to the hands and fingers. And hernias are when the intestines push through weakened muscles in the abdomen and appear as a bulge beneath the skin. Now, as you can see, based on all of these examples, MSDs affect all parts of the body and are a considerable problem that need to be addressed. So now we've covered a bit of background on the topic, I will move into the research approach of the white paper, and this will cover the methodology, the study characteristics, and intervention categories. So starting off, the white paper was structured around a systematic literature review, and that started off with a guiding research question, which was what interventions have been demonstrated to be effective in preventing work-related MSDs and injuries for the top 10 afflicted industries among workers 18 years of age and older. Now, as you can see in the chart on the right, these are the top 10 industries that we're talking about, and these are defined by the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Moving on to our inclusion criteria for what articles were included in the review. The articles had to be related to occupational health and safety. They had to include an adult population, so 18 years of age or older. They had to focus on one of the top 10 afflicted industries that were mentioned on the previous slide. They had to include a control or comparison group, had to be prevention or intervention focused, written in the English language, peer-reviewed, and have data collected from 2011 to 2021. Now, as you can see in the chart on the right, a lot of articles got weeded out from the initial identification of the databases, and this was especially due to the control and comparison group requirement, and we were left with 58 articles in our final full text review. So finally, the intervention categories, all of the articles were split into these categories. Do note that some articles were grouped into more than one category. For example, some articles included both a physical modification intervention as well as a cognitive processes intervention. Starting off with the physical modifications, also another note, our team is preparing a peer-reviewed version of this white paper. And in that peer-reviewed version, the two subcategories of the physical modification will be represented individually. So there will be 4 intervention categories total. But for the white paper, the physical modifications intervention section was split into 2 subcategories, with the first being interventions that relate to the physical environment and equipment as it relates to human interaction within the workplace, and the second subcategory being physical activity as it relates to human performance. The next intervention category was cognitive processes, and these were articles that included interventions that were concerned with mental processes and decision-making among humans in the workplace. And the final intervention category was organizational change management, which surrounded interventions concerned with the realignment of organizational structures, policies, and processes to better address worker needs. And now I will pass it over to Emily to discuss some of our findings.
Thank you, Sydney. So starting off, I'll dive into our findings and begin to touch on what these mean for the workplace. So the majority of workplace interventions within our 58 included articles concerned the topics of educational training, such as workplace training or ergonomics-based training. Some also included participatory ergonomics, which, as we know, is where you actively involve workers in the planning and improvement of their own activities. Other studies included exoskeletons or novel tools and other materials such as slide boards or specially designed shoes. And then we also had a handful of articles that included exercise and physical activity programs such as dynamic stretching and warm-ups, resistance training, or massage therapy. We found that there were 3 prevalent industries within the interventions, and these were healthcare, manufacturing, and construction. And while not an industry, we did actually include office work in our results as well, given its prevalence and unique demands. Additionally, we discovered that many interventions included follow-up with participants between 6 and 12 months, which is very beneficial because we know in the research world, this is when we can begin to measure the true effect of an intervention, such as did the intervention actually produce the change we wanted over time, or was the change simply an immediate short-term change? So starting off with this table, we have the represented industry of the study on this left-hand side and the compared intervention category on the top. And on the bottom are the total number of studies captured within each intervention. And then the right-hand side are the total number within each industry. And you'll see we have a note down here explaining what our abbreviations are up here. But quickly, so we have P is for physical modifications and exercise, equipment and devices, exoskeletons. This is other multifaceted cognitive processes, organizational change management, and so on. So as you see, there was a lot of overlap between the different intervention categories. A check mark indicates a unique study where the intervention was tested and found to reduce MSDs, pain, and the associated symptoms. And X indicates a unique study in which the intervention was tested and found to actually be ineffective for MSDs, pain, or associated symptoms. So as you can see in the table, the majority of our interventions, again, fell into healthcare with 21 studies, manufacturing of 14, in office work, our ad hoc industry with 13. And you also see that a large number of these interventions centered on physical modifications of exercise and physical modifications with equipment and devices. And even though these physical modification interventions had the greatest representation, we actually discovered those interventions that combined more than one category, specifically physical modifications and cognitive processes, and physical modifications and organizational change management actually had the greatest outcome, so the greatest amount of effectiveness for reducing musculoskeletal related symptoms, including pain.
Alrighty, thanks, Emily, for the synopsis of findings. So now that we have seen some of those findings, what did we really kind of learn from all this, and where do we know now that more effort might be needed in future research and practice? So that's what we'll cover on the next couple of slides. And so as we just saw on the slides that Emily previously showed us with the effectiveness of the interventions in those tables, combination interventions seem like a promising approach, but were only included in 12 of the 58 studies that we reviewed. Researchers have emphasized in the past that focusing on physical factors alone may not fully solve the workplace MSDs issue. And so we need to continue to consider psychosocial and organizational factors in our intervention designs as well. Essentially, if MSDs are multifactorial and that they can affect a person from a variety of risk sources in a variety of ways, we need interventions that will address MSDs holistically as well. So as we move forward, both researchers and practitioners should be focused on designing, piloting, and evaluating interventions that utilize a multifactorial approach to MSD prevention. Additionally, we saw that equipment and devices seem to have a positive impact, with 9 out of the 11 interventions assessed in this review utilizing some kind of novel equipment or device that decreased MSD symptoms or pain. However, while some novel equipment was tested, there were some noticeable gaps that we want to address. And Philip, I think I saw that you had a question kind of related to some of these technology things we're about to cover here. So first, while we know that a technological revolution is here, which some MSD and ergonomics researchers refer to as Industry 4.0 and even Industry 5.0, these studies on up and coming technologies were largely missing from our review. This is likely because studies on such new technologies such as digital twins, robotics, computer vision, and AI have not yet been tested within a controller comparison study design just yet. However, we would expect to see studies with this higher level of methodological rigor in the coming years as these technologies become more integrated in MSD prevention programs. Many of these technologies also don't yet have a design or implementation standard, and as such may not have been tested under such a rigorous methodology just yet. Again, we hope to see more studies with control or comparison groups that trial this type of tech in the future. Moreover, there were some notable gaps in the generalizability of these findings. So for example, some trials with equipment or devices did not include women in their interventions. This was more common in studies utilizing exoskeletons in which fit could not properly be done for women, or in industries in which women are less represented. Additionally, some studies implemented equipment or devices, but did not provide participants with specifications on how to properly interact with the equipment. So for example, there was a study within the review that utilized sit-to-stand desks as part of their intervention, but they did not instruct participants on how often to use the standing feature. And so this highlights a real lack of standardization in how the equipment may have been used. Also, while all studies included some metrics on if MSD's pain or symptoms were reduced, not all studies asked participants what their perceptions were of using the new equipment or device. And we know that buy-in and uptake of equipment and devices from employees is imperative for the success of implementing a new solution. And so researchers should aim to ask such perceptual questions in all future intervention studies. And lastly, we just wanted to note on this slide that more standards are needed for equipment and devices in general. Notably, ASTM, or the American Society for Testing and Materials, is focusing on an exoskeleton or exosuit ergonomics assessment decision tree, in which the idea is that exoskeletons or suits that make it to market need to have gone through some rigorous, more standardized testing, inclusive of controlled trials with long-term follow-ups to adequately determine effectiveness. So standards such as these are vital to ensuring that only effective, safe, viable products for MSD prevention make it to market and are important to consider when designing future studies on MSD interventions. Next, thank you. And while not as typically prescribed in MSD prevention, the review did see a lot of studies focusing on physical activity as a form of intervention to reduce MSDs and their associated pain and symptoms. Notably, 15 of the 16 studies focusing on physical activity forms of intervention found positive impacts on MSD outcomes. And based on this, employers should consider offering proper rest breaks for employees to engage in physical activity, such as stretching before a shift or doing another form of warm-up. Additionally, employers should overall aim to create a culture that emphasizes a healthy lifestyle for employees, such as offering flexible schedules, well-being initiatives to engage employees in their health, and other such initiatives. However, it's important to state here that the onus of MSD prevention remains on the employer. While physical activity programs and initiatives are important, they need to be employer-driven. Employers should focus on ways that they can encourage daily movement for their employees while at work as a means to lessen their propensity to suffer from a work-related MSD. We know that engaging in physical activity can reduce pain, improve quality of life, and strengthen your joints and muscles, which is why employer-driven physical activity can be a beneficial component of an MSD prevention program. And while a lot of our thoughts from the previous slides for future directions are kind of intervention specific, some are also more general regarding the types of intervention studies that should be conducted and are based on some of the limitations from the white paper that we found. So for example, based on the current white paper, we recognize that future studies could benefit from having larger sample sizes so that results from such intervention studies will have higher fidelity. Moreover, future studies should be designed with the goal of control comparison style intervention in place, or when that's not possible, a pre-post design in which comparisons can be made between engaging in an intervention and not engaging in an intervention. And additionally, as Emily stated in the findings section, many studies within our paper were collected from just a handful of industries, most notably manufacturing, healthcare, and construction. And future studies should really look to include a wider array of industries in their designs. So for example, we had an interesting conversation in the past with some folks who worked in the mining industry, and they mentioned that they had not seen a lot of quality intervention trials that test the kind of equipment that they're considering implementing in their field. So as an alternative, they often look to the construction industry, which they see as a possible analog for them with the same kind of risk factors when deciding on MSD prevention methods to implement. Yet we know that decision-making would probably be a lot easier for them if they could choose from interventions that have been tested in their own field. Also, studies should aim to measure true instances of MSDs and not just MSD symptoms or pain. Many of the studies that we assessed in the white paper looked at MSD symptoms or pain, and studies would have been strengthened if they looked at the actual instances of injuries and not just self-report pain or injury or pain or MSD symptoms. Additionally, studies should aim for follow-ups at least 6 months, but ideally 12 months after the intervention period to determine if impacts from the intervention still persist. We thankfully did see a lot of these 6 to 12 month time lags in the studies assessed in the white paper, but just wanted to make a note that that is important for future studies to consider as well. And overall, studies should also be designed for quality, such as including blinding when possible, using proper forms of validated measurement tools, using strong study designs, and lastly, including diverse individuals so we can better understand how interventions impact all workers. And so we just covered some of the research implications, but now we should talk a little bit about some of the practical takeaways. So the following are things that organizations should take into consideration when planning to implement interventions to prevent MSDs in their own workforces. So for starters, organizations should strive to trial interventions through high quality pilots. From a research perspective, it would be ideal to have a control and comparison group. That is a group who receives the intervention while at the same time another comparable group does not receive the intervention. However, we have this note here at the bottom to highlight that while implementing comparison groups with an industry may be difficult due to several factors, this study design is able to provide effectiveness results with the most fidelity. But if it's proven that it's not feasible to implement this kind of design due to organizational constraints, a pre-post study design may be more suitable if it's implemented properly. Additionally, when looking to broaden your MSD prevention programs, consider interventions that assess psychosocial and organizational factors of MSDs as well, and not just physical factors. And also, as technology continues to emerge, pilot such tech solutions to see if they might be the right fit for your workers and for your risks. When starting out, it might be beneficial to utilize technology in combination with other interventions before fully adopting tech as your main intervention approach. And while most of us today on the webinar probably know this, just a reminder that MSD interventions are not one size fits all. What works to mitigate some risks might not work to mitigate others in your organization, and what works for one organization might not be suitable for your organization, especially as we know job tasks vary widely. Additionally, more nuanced factors such as culture of your organization will impact solution effectiveness, making it kind of difficult to generalize solutions from one industry to the next. And knowing this, while we can and should learn from our peers in the MSD prevention and intervention space, we need to understand that interventions might need to be tweaked in order to fit the unique characteristics of your individual organization. And alrighty, so to wrap up, we just wanted to touch on some of what the lab will be focusing on coming up over the next year or so. So the research team is hard at work on a paper discussing DE&I factors and MSDs to better understand how MSDs impact those from minority work groups and how we can use this information to better design and implement MSD prevention programs. The paper will be accompanied by a playbook of practical steps to ensure that all workers are properly covered by your prevention programs. The team is also working on a paper regarding technological advancements in workplace MSD solutions. And we know this is an ever-changing area with the emergence of new and cutting-edge technology seemingly popping up every month or even every week. So this paper will highlight some of the more emergent technology in this space and provide information regarding implementation and how to choose between different tech. Additionally, as Emily teased kind of at the top of the webinar, the team is going to be offering grants in 2023. So as those become more finalized, we can send out some more information about grants here coming up soon. And lastly, we have a few exciting action-packed events coming up this year, kicking off with the Future of EHS event in Long Beach, California at the end of the month. If you're interested in learning about the future of health and safety and learning from other health and safety experts, consider joining us in California. Additionally, the lab is already gearing up for another terrific NSC Congress and Expo in October of this year. So if you were there last year, you might be familiar with the Technology Pavilion, and we're doing it even bigger and better this coming year. So we'll highlight some up and coming technology to mitigate and eliminate MSDs in the Tech Pavilion. You'll have the opportunity to see hundreds of other solutions for workplace safety issues and hear talks and panels from leading health and safety professionals on a wide array of workplace safety topics. And also beyond NSC events, the research team will be presenting at a number of conferences this year, inclusive of the Applied Ergonomics Conference, the American Association of Occupational Health Nurses Conference, and the American Occupational Health Conference. So if you're planning to attend any of these, we'd love to connect with you there. So feel free to reach out to us and we'll have some contact information on the coming slide. And I know that we've covered kind of just some of the highlights here today from the white paper, but we really encourage you to read the full text version of the white paper if you have not already. This can be found by either scanning the QR code here or going to our website and accessing it through our resources tab. And so Emily just dropped that link in the chat if you guys want to check it out. And then I also just wanted to briefly talk about the MSD Pledge, which is a real cornerstone initiative from the MSD Solutions Lab. So the MSD Pledge is an employer call to action in which we are aiming to gather a global community of organizations interested in enriching their MSD prevention and elimination journey. Through the MSD Pledge, we are asking that those who take the pledge aim to reduce risks within their organization, innovate and collaborate with their peers and those within the pledge community, and build or continue fostering an organizational culture that values safety. Ultimately, we also envision that the MSD Pledge culminates into an actual reduction in MSD risks and injuries. So we plan to measure this reduction in risk and other components of the pledge commitment, such as building a culture of safety and innovating and collaborating through the MSD Solutions Index, which Emily mentioned, which is a first of its kind measurement tool designed to measure MSD risk reduction initiatives. All MSD Pledge members are asked to partake in the MSD Solution Index, and all members of the Pledge community will receive individualized feedback on their performance on the index, as well as be able to benchmark with other organizations within the MSD Pledge community. All data collected through this tool are confidential and no information about pledge organizations. Responses on the index will ever be made public in a way that's identifiable, but it could be a great opportunity to learn more about how your organization is doing in their MSD prevention journey and get to learn a little bit more about how others are doing in their journey as well. So if you're interested in coming along on this journey with us, please feel free to use the QR code here on this next slide to learn more about the pledge, and also use it as a chance to explore our website and view many of the other great free resources that we have available pertaining to MSD awareness and prevention. And as a teaser, next week, I believe on the 19th, the lab will be dispersing a sample ergonomics policy that other organizations can utilize as a guide when developing or refining their own ergonomics policies. So stay tuned for that coming out next week. And with that, I think we have a good amount of time for some Q&A, and I see that there's been some questions in the chat as we've been talking, and so we'll take some time to look through those and answer any questions that you guys may have. And just to note that we have seen some questions. I think there's been quite a few about, will the recording be available after the webinar, and will the slides be available? And yes, and yes. An email will be sent to those who are here today with a recording of the webinar, as well as sent to those who might have missed today's webinar. And we can also send a PDF version of the slides in that email. So that will be coming.
I see a question that I think Dr. Paige DeBalo can answer from Aya. Is there an opportunity for us participating organizations to be a part of future studies led by NSC, the MSD Solutions Lab, such as trialing new technologies, exoskeletons, etc.?
Yeah, I really like that question. Yes, there will be some opportunities for partnering with different organizations to pilot some new and interesting tech that's coming out. So I know that as a part of the grants that Emily mentioned, and I mentioned here at the bottom of the webinar, there will be pilot grants available. So for industries or businesses that are interested in piloting some tech that was showcased at the Congress and Expo from 2022, there is an opportunity to be able to pilot some of that technology that's coming out. So that we should have more information about that in the coming weeks for the pledge community and others.
Okay. I see a question from Victoria. For the future study on minority workers in MSDs, have you considered any language barriers in training with ergonomics? The answer is yes, the DE&I paper will touch on making sure that all of your materials, not only ergonomics policies, are available in languages that fit your workforce. So stay tuned for that paper.
And Eric, I see your question about what are fundamental parts of a highly effective ergonomics program to reduce MSDs. And that's a great question and almost a slide that we considered adding into the webinar, but we're worried about timing. But there is a great paper by Vanderbeek from 2017 that has this kind of flow chart of what would be good things to consider when you're implementing your ergonomics program. And we can try to find that link to a paper and drop it in the chat or shoot you an email after the webinar, because it's a really great kind of starting place to get your feet wet with what would make a good ergonomics program to reduce MSDs. And Philip, I see that you have a question about a correlation with NSC's emphasis on fatigue and impairment with MSDs. And yes, I know that Emily has done some work in impairment. So Emily, I don't know if you want to tackle this one.
Yeah, so we know that there is research coming out, and I believe Canada, Europe, and Australia are light years ahead of the US on this topic as well. There's definitely a relationship between not only fatigue being a part of impairment, but also we know with opioids, heat stress, and other factors like that, that there is an impact on musculoskeletal disorders. That's actually an area of research that we are considering for the future as well. So we can hopefully catch up with the rest of our global representation on the advisory council.
And Lisa, I see you kind of have a logistical question about when new resources get added to the website. And a lot of times we do try to have an email that goes out to folks who are on our listserv and who have kind of signed up to receive that type of information. So we can make sure that you're included in that distribution list so that when we announce that a new resource is out, you'll get a kind of a ping to let you know to be checking for something.
I see, Caleb, you have a question about what other conferences would you recommend to keep up with the field, being new to the field of ergonomics? We did mention, so AEC is a great conference, the Applied Ergonomics Conference. I believe this year it is in March in New Orleans. That's a great conference for new and experienced practitioners. Another great one is the Human Factors and Ergonomics Society Conference. That will be occurring later in 2023.
And Lauren, I see your question about if any of the interventions looked at work arrangement, so temporary or contract work versus permanent and non-temporary work. Super interesting question. And no, we did not see that. Most of them were full-time employees who worked for the organization and were not on some kind of temporary or contract work. But it is something that we're curious about. And so we do have a couple items on the MSD Solutions Index to ask folks who are in our pledge community if they have a workforce that is in temporary or contract work, or even things like hybrid and remote work, just to kind of understand some of the nuances between work arrangement and propensity to maybe suffer from MSDs or MSD risks. So.
I see a question from Jacob about how can tech companies engage with the Solutions Lab. So if you would like more specifics on how to engage with us further, you can always email us at the MSD Solutions Lab at nsc.org email. And then we do have, we mentioned our Tech Innovation Showcase that tech companies can apply for and try to present either at the Future of EHS, which is we do have a tech expo, and then also at our NSC Congress event, we do have another much larger tech expo pavilion and floor where we will showcase emerging, old, new, and groundbreaking technologies there.
And Wenhai, I see that you had a question about intervention effectiveness and kind of what type of methodology, excuse me, was used to determine which interventions were more effective. And so for all of the check marks and X's that Emily showed on that table, there were statistical analyses run to determine that. So those were statistically significant reductions that we saw. So whether it was t-tests that were being run or ANOVAs or other methodologies that fit with the study design, it was at a statistically significant level that we saw those reductions. So we didn't really want to grant that check mark to something if it didn't pass that significance threshold. And I think that is one of the pluses of using the control comparison design. It makes it kind of easy to do some of those comparisons to see where the reductions of your comparison group different from your control group. So a bonus of that kind of design. And Philip, I see a note that if the MSD Solutions Lab has routine meetings open to the public, and we do host town halls, those are usually quarterly. And so that's another thing that would be sent out in some of those emails about MSD Solutions Lab happenings. And so we can make sure that you're added to that listserv as well so that you can hear about some of those upcoming town halls and other events that the lab has.
And we also do have, for those who sign the pledge, we do have new member orientations that occur on a monthly basis to kind of share more about who we are, what are we doing, what is our purpose, where have we been, where are we currently, and where are we going regarding working to solve this issue.
And Andrea, I think one of the more recent questions of the 58 studies that were referenced, what percentage were from US-based organizations? And that's a great question. A bunch of them were, but I think we were pleasantly surprised that it was pretty international in scope. So there were a lot of studies done out of Finland and out of Germany, out of Israel and some other countries as well. And so we have a more full breakdown of the countries available that will be in the peer-reviewed version that we published, and I believe in the white paper that's listed online as well. But yes, mostly US based, but I think in the grand scheme of things from other, reviews like this I've been involved in, I was surprised and pleasantly that there was a nice international presence in the studies.
And I see two questions that are similar from Victor and Marianne about the transportation industry. And in our white paper, given our strict inclusion criteria, we did only find a handful of articles that looked at MSDs in transportation, and particularly they focused on the risk factor of whole body vibration. So they were focusing on comparing passive versus active seats to reduce vibration. And we're happy to, if you want to email us after this meeting, we're more than happy to send more information on those and also those articles that we looked into as well.
Also note that for industry specific questions, one of the resources we have on our website are industry spotlights. These are being published on a rolling basis and they focus on the risks and some potential solutions by industry. So the ones we currently have released are retail, trade, and healthcare. And we actually have one on the transportation industry upcoming. So stay posted for that.
And Eric, I see a question about the difference between lifting and pushing and pulling in MSDs. A lot of times, some of these concepts that you're listing here are kind of conglomerated into the overexertion component of MSDs as kind of a risk factor. But lifting would be, really lifting a box, off the floor, off of a cart, and pushing and pulling would be those pushing of a cart or some kind of other equipment or device or pulling of that cart. And we know that there's some differences with that, and that sometimes pulling, maybe you need to look over your shoulder, to pull some things. There could be some different engagement that's happening in some of those different movements that you're doing. So there are sometimes specific solutions dependent on if your main issue is lifting versus if your main issue might be pushing or pulling. So definitely something to look into.
Yeah, and our inaugural innovation showcase last year actually focused on reducing manual material handling. I know a lot of the emerging technologies really focused on those. So for example, we had robotics and carts that could just follow by a sensor, and then they will move things for you. They'll take it from point A to point B, and it completely removes the human aspect of that pushing and pulling. There were also a handful of exoskeletons that looked into kind of assisting the human in those manual material handling aspects as well.
And Scott, I see your question down here. So out of your studies, what MSDs have you seen in distribution center settings the most? And so just anecdotally, I think we know that's a lot of some of those picking tasks. So, maybe picking packages or loading packages into something. So some of the lifting that we mentioned earlier, but also some of that repetitive motion. So kind of doing the same kind of micro task over and over again can be one of the issues in distribution centers. And maybe that's dependent on what you might be distributing. If you're distributing, big refrigerators, that might have a much bigger lifting component to it. But if it's just something small like packages, it might have more of that repetitive motion MSD.
So we'll give everyone a few more minutes to see if there's any other lingering questions. Otherwise, we will wrap up here shortly. So get those last minute questions in.
And Jonathan, I see a question here about if there might be compressed training on MSDs that could be used for new hire orientations. That's a great question and something that we think about, like, man, when we have time, within the MSD Solutions Lab, we'd love to create some kind of, short abbreviated, really in-depth training on MSD prevention that could be used for orientation. So something that could be coming down the line, but definitely something that we've thought of. And I know there's a lot of good other trainings out there on MSDs that probably could be used for new hire orientation as well.
I see a question from Eric about, is repetitive motion specific enough to describe an MSD? It's a bit more nuanced than that. So repetitive motion is more of a risk factor that can contribute to an MSD. So if we start in the beginning of the pendulum, if you will, the risk factor of repetitive motion occurs over here. And then an MSD is kind of the outcome out there. A question from Alana about exoskeletons. So we did look into exoskeletons as a whole in the white paper, just kind of as Paige mentioned, looking into how they are effective, if they are, and what other gaps are needed. As we know, a lot of leading organizations are working on this. This is at the forefront of the Human Factors and Ergonomics Society, and ASTM is coming up with standards. Regarding a recommendation, I'm assuming you mean for a specific tech provider, and here at the council, we actually do not promote specific technology providers, but we are happy to, again, if you read our results, that those will hopefully guide you in the right direction to make an informed decision. Yeah, well, I think we are winding down here for a little bit. So thank you all so much for coming today. We greatly appreciate having you all here and being engaged in the discussion here at the end. As always, if you have any questions, feel free to email us at the MSD Solutions Lab at nsc.org website, and a member of our team will respond when able and after we have been able to source the proper response to your question. And if you would like to learn more, our website, nsc.org/MSD, is up 24/7, and new things are added to it all the time. As Paige mentioned, if you want to be notified of when new things are posted, you can join our listserv. And we also have a new newsletter going out on a monthly basis that kind of shows you what is new with the lab, but also our other departments here at the council, such as Work to Zero and our Safer initiatives, as well as the Campbell Institute. So with that, thank you all so much for joining today. We greatly appreciate it. And we hope you all have a great rest of your day. Thank you.